It was supposed to be the end. The skies above Earth had gone dark, not from clouds or nightfall, but from the shadow of the alien armada that blanketed the atmosphere. Cities lay in ruins, oceans boiled in places where their weapons had struck, and the last transmissions from Earth's defense networks had gone silent days ago. To the rest of the galaxy, humanity was finished. And yet, something still stirred in the ashes. The invaders, the Tauri Dominion, didn't celebrate with fanfare. They never did. Their victories were methodical, emotionless. Planets were taken, species subjugated, resistance extinguished. It was a pattern that had worked for thousands of years. When they claimed Earth, it was no different. Another unruly world bent under their firepower. Another civilization wiped from the stars. But they had made a mistake. They thought the war was over. They thought wrong. In the broken remains of what was once a communications relay buried deep beneath the Siberian tundra, something flickered to life. It wasn't a distress signal. It wasn't a surrender. It was a heartbeat. A coded pulse that repeated once every 9 seconds. To the untrained ear, it sounded like static interference. Background noise from a fractured world. But to those who knew what to listen for, it was a call. One last call. In a bunker so deep it hadn't felt the tremors of the orbital strikes, a man opened his eyes to darkness. His breath was ragged. His body was weak from months, maybe years, of stasis. The cryo-fluid clung to his skin, freezing him with memories he couldn't yet place. But one thought pressed through the fog in his mind. They weren't supposed to wake him unless everything else had failed. He coughed once. Then again. Pain clawed its way through his lungs, but it was a welcome pain. It meant he was still here. Still human. He reached for the console beside his pod, hands trembling, and activated the manual override. Lights flickered on. Dim, faint. Power reserves were low. Figures in other pods lay silent, unmoving. Many were empty. Some had failed. He didn't look at those too long. Instead, he focused on the one thing still blinking, the terminal. A red screen. Encrypted coordinates. And 3 words. Final directive, execute response. The Tauri had moved on. They had no interest in debris. Only the next conquest mattered. Their scouts remained in orbit, monitoring just in case the humans managed to crawl out from under the rubble. But none of their long-range sensors had picked up movement. No signals. No threats. Earth was quiet. Too quiet. So when a signal burst from the North Pole, short, sharp, and aimed straight into deep space, they barely registered it. Probably malfunctioning tech, some primitive satellite reacting to cosmic interference. They dismissed it. That was mistake number 2. Because the signal wasn't calling for help. It was calling something else. In the outer reaches of the solar system, far beyond Neptune's orbit, a fleet rested in silence. It was invisible to most scanners, drifting between gravitational shadows, its systems cold and dark. But when the signal reached them, the fleet stirred. One by one, massive vessels hummed to life. Their designs were unmistakably human, brutal, angular, scarred from battles past. These weren't colony ships or defense platforms. These were relics from a time when Earth had prepared for war, not just on the ground but across the stars. They had been kept secret for a reason. The fleet was never part of Earth's main defense. It wasn't listed in databases. It had no official command structure. It was built for one purpose only: retribution. The AI cores on board flickered awake. Engines warmed. Weapons calibrated. And then, in perfect silence, they began to move. Back toward Earth. Back toward the ones who thought they had won. The man from the bunker stood before a cracked mirror, trying to recognize the face staring back. He barely did. But it didn't matter who he was before. All that mattered now was what he had to do. He entered the command room, half destroyed, screens broken, systems sparking, and activated the emergency uplink. The network was in shambles. Satellites were gone. The space towers had collapsed. But the buried hard lines still carried whispers. And buried in those whispers were others like him. Scattered units. Hidden cells. People who had waited just like he had. And now they answered. It wasn't many. A few dozen here. A small group there. Some in orbit, living like ghosts on shattered stations. Others hidden in old mines, deep-sea bunkers, forgotten places the Tauri never bothered to scan. But they were enough. Together they formed the last resistance. Not soldiers. Not armies. But survivors. And survivors were dangerous. Because they had nothing left to lose. A Tauri general floated in his command chamber, suspended in zero gravity. Its limbs twitched with irritation as it watched another useless data stream flicker past. Residual energy surges, its aide reported. But nothing of concern. Planet remains subjugated. All human activity is minimal. The general grunted. It had expected more. The humans had fought harder than most. Even inflicted unexpected losses. Their ships had been crude but aggressive. Their tactics, unorthodox. One human ship had deliberately rammed one of the Dominion's dreadnoughts. No evasive maneuvers. No surrender. Just fire, steel, and silence. Illogical, but effective. They were unpredictable, these humans. The general dismissed the thought. They were finished now. Dead or scattered. Nothing remained. It closed its eyes and returned to meditation. It never saw the transmission pass just beneath its station's detection grid. A tiny spike. A coded pulse. But the humans saw it. And they responded. Somewhere in the ruined mountains of South America, two teenagers picked through the wreckage of an old power substation. The girl wore a scavenged respirator, the boy carried a rifle too large for his arms. They weren't siblings, not by blood, but the war had made everyone family. She paused when the radio on her belt crackled. A voice, faint, calling, "Anyone, listen." She froze. The boy looked at her. That wasn't static. "No," she said, breathless. "It wasn't." The voice returned, stronger this time. "This is Phoenix Station. We are alive. If you hear this, follow the stars. You are not alone." They stared at each other, disbelief and hope warring across their faces. And for the first time in months the girl smiled. Someone was out there. Still fighting. Still human. The Retribution fleet entered low Earth orbit within hours. Their arrival wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Lights streaked across the sky like falling stars. The Tauri scouts scrambled to respond, but their comms failed. Their sensors scrambled. One by one their ships vanished from the grid. The Dominion's orbital garrison was suddenly blind. And then, they were gone. One moment a dozen ships. The next, ash. On Earth, survivors looked up and whispered the same word. Hope. Because fire was raining down, but not on them. Not anymore. In a hollowed-out cathedral somewhere in what was once Eastern Europe, a small group huddled around a cracked screen. They watched grainy footage of the sky as a Tauri warship split in half and fell into the ocean. One of the elders crossed himself. A child clapped. The woman with the radio whispered, "They came back." No one replied. They didn't need to. Because across the world, stories like this were unfolding everywhere. People emerging from hiding. Signals lighting up. Underground channels coming alive with voices. We are not finished. We are not broken. We are not alone. But deep in the shadows of space, something else moved. Another ship. Older than the others. Colder. This one wasn't part of the Retribution fleet. It had no flags. No crew. Only a mission. A weapon humanity had buried in silence even before the war had begun. Because some enemies didn't deserve mercy. And Earth had planned long ago for a time when mercy would be the last thing on the table. The ship's AI hummed. Coordinates locked. Target, Dominion homeworld. Authorization code, final card. It activated. Engines lit. And then the blackness behind the stars swallowed it whole. Back in the bunker, the man stared at the wall where someone had painted years ago, a message in bold red letters. They think we're done. Let them. He smiled. Not because he felt joy, but because he understood now what had to be done. They had taken the cities. They had taken the sky. They had taken everything. Except us. And now it was humanity's turn to remind the galaxy. You can't kill a species that refuses to die. Somewhere, a new sun rose through the ash. The world was still broken. But the fight was back. And as the Retribution fleet descended through the clouds, fire trailing behind them like wings of vengeance, one final message was broadcast on all channels. A voice. Come. Steady. Human. This is not over. Not by a long shot. Then the signal cut to static. Ash fell like snow. The air smelled like burnt metal and old blood. In the half-collapsed ruins of what had once been a hospital, a group of survivors moved slowly through the rubble. They didn't talk much. Talking took energy, and energy was something they couldn't waste anymore. Every step had to count. Every breath mattered. Every sound, every creak of metal or crunch of glass, made hearts beat faster, not because of danger from each other but from them. The Tauri weren't gone. Not yet. Even as fire streaked across the sky and explosions lit up the horizon, the ground still belonged to the Dominion. Patrols moved through ruined cities like silent ghosts, searching, scanning, hunting. They weren't just watching for organized resistance. They were looking for anyone who still breathed. The man from the bunker had made contact with 3 resistance cells in the past 48 hours. That number was both more than he'd hoped for and far less than he needed. Most survivors were still hiding, still waiting to be sure it wasn't a trap. And they had every right to be suspicious. The Tarii had played dirty from the start. They used human voices on stolen channels. They sent fake messages. Pretended to be survivors. Even faked video footage of people asking for help, only for those who responded to walk straight into an ambush. So when the real signal started coming through again, it wasn't surprising that most people didn't believe them. It was one thing to survive the fall of Earth. It was another to trust anything again. But little by little it was changing. People were testing the waters. A scavenger on the coast of what had once been Japan picked up a coded signal that guided him to a hidden stockpile of food and medicine. A family in the Andes found an old satellite dish working again, only to discover it was now linked to a network of other survivors spread across the planet. In North Africa, a young engineer managed to hack into a Tarii drone and reroute it. It didn't last long before they found and destroyed it, but not before she uploaded its map of enemy movement to the resistance net. Every hour humanity was learning. And remembering. There had been peace before the invasion, but it was a peace filled with noise. Petty fights, digital wars, constant distraction. The world had grown tired and fractured. But now that it was in pieces, now that the silence had fallen, people were remembering what it meant to fight for each other, not just themselves. It was slow, painful, desperate, but it was real. And it was growing. The man from the bunker sat in a makeshift command center. Nothing more than a converted subway tunnel running on backup batteries and hope, and stared at a screen filled with dots. Each dot represented someone who had made contact. Some were already gone. Signals lost. Faded. But others were staying online longer now. Stronger. Clear. He zoomed in on one. A resistance camp hidden beneath an old hydroelectric dam in what had once been part of the Canadian wilderness. They'd managed to restore partial power to their sector, and more importantly, they had children. That alone made them a priority, because that meant the future was still alive. He opened the voice channel and waited. It crackled, buzzed, then cleared. A woman's voice came through, tired but firm. We're holding. Barely. Got 23 souls down here. 2 medics. 1 shortwave engineer. And 1 stubborn old farmer who refuses to sleep. The man couldn't help a faint smile. You're doing more than holding. You're proof we're not finished. She didn't answer right away. Then quietly, we saw the sky light up. The fleet. The Tarii ships falling. We weren't sure it was real. It's real, he said. But it's not over. Not yet. Her voice lowered. We know. The signal held for a few more minutes before she had to cut it. Energy conservation. But it was enough. Just knowing there were others still out there, still fighting, still believing, that was enough to keep going. Because survival wasn't the goal anymore. Now it was payback. But the mystery still lingered. Where had the Retribution fleet been hiding all this time? Why had they waited? The man didn't have answers yet. The fleet responded to a signal buried deep in the old Earth network. A signal he hadn't even known existed. And it hadn't come from him. It had activated before he'd woken. Someone else had triggered it. Or something. He accessed the logs. The signal had originated from an old research facility beneath Antarctica, one that had officially shut down 2 decades before the war. It had no public records. No known personnel. The coordinates led to a frozen wasteland with no remaining structures on the surface. But below? Below the data ended. No details. Just the words, Project Endfall. He leaned back, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. What was Endfall? And more importantly, was it still active? Elsewhere, far from the broken cities and smoking skies, a Tarii commander stood inside a glowing observation dome orbiting a shattered Earth satellite. Its large yellow eyes narrowed as it watched the planet spin slowly beneath them. It didn't understand. Humanity was supposed to be eliminated. That had been the directive. And for the most part, it had gone according to plan. But the resurgence changed everything. Something had survived the initial purge. Something large. Coordinated. Deadly. The fleet that struck their orbital patrols wasn't just effective. It was surgical. Intelligent. They knew where to hit and how. It wasn't brute force. It was vengeance. And vengeance was dangerous. The commander turned to its second-in-command, who floated silently behind it. Begin the contingency, it said in a low, rasping tone. If the humans have deployed their last weapon, we must respond in kind. The second hesitated. Are we certain it is necessary? The commander's gaze sharpened. They were dust. Now they burn our ships from the sky. Something was hidden. Something we didn't see. The aide lowered its head. As you command. The Tarii had their own secrets. And they were just as old, and just as dark, as anything Earth had buried. Within hours, signals bounced across Dominion space, silent and encrypted, waking old programs and distant machines that had not moved in centuries. If the humans were playing their last card, the Dominion would do the same. But back on Earth no one knew yet. They only knew that for the first time in a long time, there was movement in the wind. In the forests near the remains of Berlin, a young man and his grandmother gathered herbs for medicine, stepping carefully around broken glass and half-buried bones. The war hadn't spared them, but it had left enough behind to survive. The boy carried a small drone in his pack, one they'd managed to rebuild using scrap and pieces from downed enemy equipment. Each night the boy turned it on. Not to scout. Not for war. But to listen. One night he caught a signal. One he didn't recognize. A language he didn't understand. But the tone, the rhythm, it was human. The drone recorded it. He sent it to the underground network. The message spread. And it raised questions. Who was broadcasting? The coordinates didn't match any known location. But the pattern repeated. Same time. Same tone. Every day. A message from the dark. And it didn't sound afraid. The man from the bunker heard it too. He didn't know what it meant. But something in his gut told him the message wasn't just from another survivor. It was something else. Someone who had planned far ahead. Someone who had known the fall of Earth would come. And had prepared a response. He opened a new file. Labeled it, Unknown Source Alpha. Then quietly he typed, Who are you? He stared at the screen. The cursor blinked. Nothing replied. Not yet. But something was listening. And not just humans. Because deep in the void, past the edge of any known star system, a relay that should not have existed flickered to life. It was ancient. Not built by the Tarii. Not built by humans either. It had waited. Silently. Until now. It decoded the message. It understood. And it responded. Not in words. But in action. A ship moved. Huge. Silent. Unmapped. And heading toward Earth. Humanity's flame had not just lit a fire on its own world. It had sent a signal across the dark. A signal others could see. Back on Earth, the man from the bunker received another signal. New origin. No translation. The waveform was familiar but not human. Not Dominion. He froze. Ran the pattern again. The signal was coming from the far side of the moon. And it was getting closer. Who had heard the call? And what were they bringing with them? No answers yet. Only the rising sense that the war was no longer just about Earth. It never had been. Humanity had always been stubborn, chaotic, and loud, but what made them dangerous wasn't their technology. It was their refusal to stay down. That persistence, that maddening unwillingness to give up, that was what the galaxy had forgotten. But now they were remembering. And not everyone was pleased. In a Dominion command chamber light years away, a council of high commanders stood over a hologram of Earth. It was a mistake, one said. We should have destroyed the planet entirely. Another hissed. That would have cost resources. The humans were supposed to die easily. They never do, a third replied. They watched as Earth's orbit lit up with more defense signals. Human warships moving in coordinated patterns. Electronic warfare relays turning back on. Orbital defense stations being repaired. A planet that had been reduced to rubble was rebuilding. Faster than expected. Too fast. The council agreed. The next phase would not be subtle. Would be total. The command went out. Not just to Earth. But to every conquered world where whispers of human survival might exist. Purge all. Leave nothing behind. Meanwhile, far underground, the children of the dam camp listened to an old recording playing on loop from a salvaged speaker system. It was a speech. From before the war. One of the last transmissions broadcast before the skies fell. A man's voice. Clear. Steady. They may come with fire and steel. They may take our homes, our towers, our skies. But they will never take the spirit of humanity. Because we don't fight for power. We fight for each other. The youngest child didn't understand all the words. But she understood the feeling. Hope. And fear. Because she also heard the siren outside rising slowly. Another patrol. Another test of how long they could keep going. But this time when the camp braced for impact they weren't alone. The defense grid activated. Missiles, human missiles, launched from the mountains above. The sky flashed. The enemy patrol vanished. And silence returned. The children stared. The adults didn't cheer. Not yet. But they nodded. Something had changed. The game was no longer survival. It was a countdown. And no one knew what would happen when it reached 0. But everyone could feel it now. The next move would change everything. The silence before the storm had weight to it. Across the broken face of Earth, survivors felt it deep in their bones. In the stillness between patrols, in the flicker of power surges, in the eyes of children who had stopped asking when the war would end, something had shifted. The air carried it. Heavy. Electric. As if the world itself was holding its breath. The Retribution fleet had held its position for days, unmoving above the Earth like steel angels. Watching. Waiting. No one knew what they were waiting for. No one knew who exactly commanded them. They didn't respond to open channels. They didn't ask for anything. They just hovered, weapons ready, engines idle. Down below, in the tunnels and bunkers and shattered cities, those left alive felt the tension crawling up their spines. Everyone knew. Something was coming. The man from the bunker hadn't slept in almost 48 hours. He stared at the growing cascade of red alerts flashing across his central screen. Dominion reinforcements had jumped into the solar system. Stealth cruisers, siege carriers, unknown classes. More than expected. More than should have been possible. He saw the formations. Saw how fast they were mobilizing. How close they were getting. Too close. He tapped into the fleet's tracking grid and saw them. Lines of enemy ships darkening the edge of Mars' orbit, cutting their way inward. Fast. Precise. No hesitation. No mercy. He reached for the comm. All outposts, this is command. You know what this is. No more waiting. No more hiding. Prepare fallback routes. Prepare evacuations if you have to. But whatever you do, don't break star. Not now. Voices answered. Cracked. Shaken. But clear. We're holding. We're ready. Let them come. But he could hear it underneath. The fear. Even with the fleet above, even with power returning, even with survivors reconnecting, this wasn't a war Earth could win through hope alone. This was about endurance, timing, sacrifice. And now the enemy wasn't just coming to retake control. They were coming to end everything. He opened the classified folder again. The one marked Project Endfall. Still locked. Still red. The signal that had activated the fleet had come from the Antarctic sector. He had sent scouts, drones, small teams, whatever he could spare, but none had returned. Not even a trace. It wasn't just a dead zone. It was a void. Something down there had teeth. And he couldn't shake the thought that it was waiting for the same thing the fleet was. The final piece. The last move. Across the solar system, skirmishes broke out. Small. Sure. Test strikes from the Dominion fleet to probe the human defenses. Satellites were destroyed. Deep space sensors jammed. Relay buoys vanished from the network. But Earth didn't fold. For every attack there was a countermeasure. Not always perfect. Not always clean. But it was enough. Just enough to make the Dominion hesitate. They hadn't expected this much resistance. Not from a planet that was supposed to be in ashes. Not from humans. But even hesitation didn't mean safety. It meant something worse. It meant the Dominion was adjusting. Adapting. And they had more coming. Far more. In the shadows of the Kuiper Belt, beyond Neptune, massive Dominion transports were waking. Sleeper ships. Carriers filled not with soldiers but with cleansers. Machines that erased ecosystems. Drones that cracked crusts and boiled oceans. They weren't sending a fleet to fight anymore. They were sending extinction. The man saw the data spike from his warning net and felt the breath freeze in his chest. He whispered the word no one wanted to say. Exterminators. And still, Project Endfall remained sealed. He slammed his fist into the console. What are you waiting for? He muttered. As if the system might finally answer. But it stayed silent. Just like before. In the dam camp up north, the children were being moved. Too many Dominion scout drones had passed overhead. The adults packed what little they had. No engines. No heat signatures. Everything had to stay cold and quiet. A medic kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered a lie, that it would be all right, The lie broke something inside her, but the girl needed to believe. They all needed to believe. Somewhere above, in the black, the fleet began to stir. Weapons unlocked. Engines flared. One of the old warships, the Crescent Flame, shifted out of its drift and pointed toward the edge of Earth's orbit. It was the first movement from the fleet since arrival. No one had commanded it. No orders had been sent. Just moved, like it had smelled blood. The Dominion fleet responded instantly. 4 scout ships changed course. 2 cloaked destroyers repositioned. They still weren't sure how the humans had hidden this fleet for so long. And it scared them. Because the ships weren't automated. They weren't drones. They had no life signs. And yet, they moved like predators. With intent. With memory. With rage. The fleet had come back with scars. And those scars wanted revenge. The man from the bunker watched the data unfold. He switched to a private channel. The last one. Buried deep in the net. The unknown signal, the one from the moon's far side, was still active. Still silent. Still waiting. He transmitted. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're waiting for. But if you're one of us, if you're anything human, now is the time. We can't hold much longer. You wanted the Dominion to see us stand. You wanted them to fear us. But we're past that now. He swallowed hard. Voice cracked. We're out of time. The reply came 5 seconds later. One word. Not a name. Not a confirmation. Just, ready. And with that the signal ended. Gone. The man stared at the screen trying to process what it meant. But there was no time. The warning klaxon screamed. The Dominion had crossed into Earth's defense boundary. Dozens of ships. Thousands of drones. And the massive exterminator cruiser following behind. The skies above Earth turned red with heat signatures. The invasion had begun. All channels lit up. Panic. Orders. Screams. Survivor camps begging for instructions. Military remnants requesting coordinates. Even some former enemies, rogue colonies from past conflicts, sent messages. Offering weapons. Data. Anything. Because the fall of Earth didn't just mean the end of humanity. It meant the end of hope. The fleet began to descend. Fire trailed behind them. The sky was streaked with metal. Civilians watched from shattered windows. Children held onto parents. Old veterans gripped rusted weapons they thought they'd never use again. And far below the ice, in the dead continent of Antarctica, something opened. A door. No sound. No light. Just a shift in the snow that had been untouched for decades. Inside, machinery stirred. It. Unholy. Project Endfall had not been built to save the world. It had been built to make sure if the world fell, the enemy paid for it. With everything. And now, someone had triggered it. In space, the exterminator cruiser unleashed its first weapon. A planetary breaker. Designed to crack tectonic plates and turn continents inside out. It never made it to Earth. The crescent flame intercepted it mid-flight. No shields. No evasions. It simply rammed into the weapon with everything it had. A blinding flash tore the clouds open. The ship died in fire. But the weapon was gone. And suddenly the rest of the Retribution fleet moved. All at once. With fury. With purpose. With humanity. The Dominion ships responded in kind. The space above Earth exploded into war. Lasers. Kinetic rounds. Plasma trails. Wreckage rained down like burning hail. Below, the resistance began to rise. Not in perfect ranks. Not with grand speeches. But with fists. Rifles. Tools turned to weapons. Hackers breaking enemy networks. Pilots flying patched together wrecks straight into battle. And the man from the bunker? He loaded his sidearm. He looked up at the image of the Dominion flagship entering low orbit. Then he turned to the sealed launch codes glowing red on his screen. Project Endfall now displayed one final message. Authorization confirmed. Awaiting final command. ***. His finger hovered above the key. Sweat rolled down his temple. This was it. But then, the Earth shook. Not from bombardment. From below. From deep under the ice. Project Endfall wasn't waiting for the final key. It was waking on its own. And whatever it was not human anymore. But it remembered who built it. And it remembered why. Above, the Dominion flagship opened its hangars. Thousands of exterminator drones spilled into the atmosphere. The resistance scrambled. The Retribution fleet braced. The skies turned black. And below, something ancient reached for the surface. And screamed. Then everything went quiet. The quiet didn't last. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel natural, like the world had inhaled and forgot how to breathe. People across the globe froze mid-step, mid-sentence, mid-prayer. Survivors clutched radios that had gone dead. Screens flickered to static. Even the enemy ships hovering in orbit paused, their formations stalling like they too were listening to something beneath the surface. Waiting. Then from deep beneath Antarctica the Earth groaned. A sound rolled out, not thunder, not a quake, but something stranger. Oh, hollow. Like a cry from something ancient forcing its way up through stone and ice and time. The signal towers in the southern hemisphere burst with static, every frequency overwhelmed with the same pulsing tone. No one could translate it. It wasn't language. It was more primal than that. A warning or a threat, it didn't matter. Everyone felt it in their bones. The man from the bunker stared at the seismic data flashing across his screen. It made no sense. Readings were off the charts, energy surges rising and falling in perfect intervals like a heartbeat. But there was no natural pattern to explain it. No weapon could do this. Nothing in Earth's arsenal, nothing the Dominion had shown. This was something else. Then the signal cut. The bunker lights dimmed. And in the dark, he understood something he hadn't dared to believe until now. Project Endfall had evolved. It was never just a weapon. It was a mind. And it was awake. In orbit, the Retribution fleet staggered as a shockwave hit their systems. Not physical, not visible. A burst of something that passed through metal and shielding and neural links like a whisper. Their onboard AIs glitched for 3 seconds. Just 3. Then rebooted. When they came back online, they had new instructions. Not from Earth. Not from any human. But from something they recognized. The fleet changed formation. Not retreating, asterisk surrounding star. They turned inward, repositioning above the southern pole, creating a sphere of coverage like a dome across the skies. They weren't aiming at the Dominion anymore. They were protecting something. On the other side of the warfront, the Dominion commander aboard the Exterminator flagship stood frozen, its sensory organs twitching rapidly. It was receiving too many signals, far beyond its spectrum, distorted pulses, hidden codes, languages not in its database. Something was bleeding into the Dominion's communication net. Something that didn't belong. The commander hissed at its technicians. They couldn't explain it. They couldn't stop it. Then all across the Dominion fleet, systems began to fail. Navigation scrambled. Auto-targeting locked onto false readings. Reactor cores pulsed irregularly. They were being hacked. But not by humans. Something far more sophisticated. Something older. Below, the ice shattered. A tower rose from the Antarctic shelf like the spire of a cathedral, tearing through layers of snow and stone that hadn't seen daylight in a million years. Metallic, black as void, and humming with power. It wasn't human-made. But it was human-designed. The blueprint had been seeded into Earth's networks generations ago. Hidden. Coded in forgotten patents, discarded research, fragmented dreams of long-dead scientists who had believed in impossible futures. A design built from imagination, fear, and foresight. The tower was humanity's last gamble. Not a weapon. A gate. And now it was opening. The man from the bunker fell back into his chair as the data hit him. Location identifiers he'd never seen before. Coordinates that didn't match Earth or the solar system. Distances measured in impossible values. Something was responding from the other side. Not the Dominion. Not allies. Not from this time. Not from this place. But from a humanity that had left long ago. There had always been rumors. That not every generation stayed behind. That during the Golden Age, before the collapse, some had gone further. Vanished into the stars. Quietly. Secretly. The Dominion hadn't known. No one had. It had been too long. Too quiet. But now, across the stars, something had heard the call. And it was coming back. The commander's voice cracked across the emergency comms. This is global priority. Anyone still listening, we are not alone. Repeat, we are not alone. Long-range scans have confirmed unidentified vessels approaching fast from deep space. Not Dominion. Not registered. He paused, then added, they're ours. A technician nearby gasped, looking at her screen. But how? The man didn't answer. He didn't know. All he knew was that the stars weren't silent anymore. The second front of the war had just opened. And humanity was no longer just defending Earth. Now they were pulling something back through time, space, and memory, something they hadn't expected to return. Hope. But even hope had a price. Because while the Dominion fleet faltered and Earth began to stir with new purpose, something else moved beneath the tower. A shape. Colossal. Shifting. The ground cracked further as more structures emerged. Towers. Arms. Circuits the size of highways lit up with pulsing blue veins. And at the core of it, a chamber glowed. Inside it, a figure stood motionless. Not quite alive. Not quite machine. And not quite human. A sentinel. Left behind by those who had gone ahead. A guardian of the gate. Its face was smooth metal, sculpted into human features, but with eyes that never blinked. Not warm. Not cruel. Just watching. Waiting. Calculating. When its systems fully activated, it did not speak. It didn't need to. Across every human screen still functioning, its image appeared. And a line of text blinked beneath it. You lit the signal. We are the answer. But you are not ready for what follows. Then the screens went dark again. No one knew what it meant. But the Dominion did. Because in their ancient archives, buried deep beneath layers of conquest and silence, there were stories of a species that had once burned too bright. That had built machines it couldn't control. That had disappeared not from weakness, but because it had been too strong. They had feared Earth for its defiance. But now something else was rising. Not just soldiers. Not just weapons. An echo. And the Dominion for the first time hesitated. The exterminator cruiser pulled back slightly. Recalculating. The commander watched the tower grow from the ice. Then looked at the readouts from deep space. Hundreds of vessels, still out of reach, still beyond weapons range. But closing in fast. Each one marked with an ancient human signature lost to time. Something inside the Dominion began to panic. Something they hadn't felt in generations. The man from the bunker stood now, staring at the tower through a live satellite feed. He didn't understand the full picture. Not yet. But he understood one thing. The war for Earth had just changed. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about legacy. It was about proving to the stars, again, why humanity was feared. And why it was never a good idea to count them out too soon. Because Earth wasn't just fighting for its future anymore. It was fighting alongside the ghosts of its possible futures. And every force in the galaxy was about to witness what happened. When the last card wasn't a weapon, but a warning. It started with light. Not a weapon. Not an explosion. Just light, pouring out of the tower in Antarctica like the first sunrise after the end of the world. It climbed into the sky with a pulse so bright it bent the clouds. The snow around it melted instantly, revealing more of the ancient structure buried beneath the ice. Tower after tower rose from the crust of the Earth, forming a circle, each one humming louder as the seconds passed. In orbit, the Dominion fleet opened fire. The first blast struck the upper atmosphere. Heat spread like wildfire across the sky. Energy beams split clouds, vaporized satellites. The Retribution fleet countered. Missiles, kinetic rounds, lasers. For every Dominion ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. The sky was on fire. Earth was caught in the middle of a war it was never meant to survive. But it didn't flinch. The resistance fought tooth and nail across the surface. Human fighters launched from hidden hangars, patched together ships screaming through the sky, breaking apart Dominion drones by sheer aggression. Children sheltered underground clutched radios still echoing the same message. Asterisk, we are here. We are with you. Asterisk. The tower's pulse grew faster. The light changed. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a bridge. Then, on the edge of the solar system, they arrived. No one had seen ships like these before. They weren't made of metal. They shimmered like they were carved from starlight itself. Silent. Massive. Moving faster than anything the Dominion had ever catalogued. Hundreds of them slipping through space like knives through water. No names. No codes. Just one repeating signal beaming from their lead ship, pulsing with a familiar beat. A human heartbeat. The man from the bunker dropped to his knees as he watched the feed. His voice cracked. They came back. The fleet, human but evolved far beyond anything Earth had ever built, didn't stop to negotiate. They didn't send greetings or warnings. They attacked. The outer Dominion fleet shattered like glass. In minutes, dozens of ships blinked out of existence, cut in half, melted from within, torn apart by forces no Dominion engineer could explain. The remaining Dominion forces panicked. Some tried to retreat. Others pushed harder, charging the tower in desperation. They never made it. The Retribution fleet tightened its formation around the tower, its remaining ships burning, damaged but standing. Like walls around a fire. The tower spoke again, not in words but in vibration. Across every screen, every helmet, every neural link, a signal echoed through the minds of every human still alive. It was a memory, a feeling, of every loss, every scream, every moment of silence after the bombs fell. And then, it turned that feeling outward. Back at the Dominion. Back at the stars. A final transmission. We remember. Do you? The tower released its full charge. The beam wasn't aimed at the fleet. It was aimed at the stars themselves. A ripple tore through subspace, stretching across light years and seconds. Not destructive. Not deadly. Declarative. A beacon. A roar. Humanity was alive. And it would never go silent again. The Dominion flagship tried to respond, launched its final weapon, a planetary core cracker designed to split Earth in half. It never got the chance. The new human fleet intercepted it with a wall of energy so vast it covered half the sky. Not tech. Not science. Something else. Something born from centuries of survival, exploration, adaptation. Something born from what humans had become beyond the stars. And in that moment, the last Dominion commander realized the truth. They hadn't won the war early. They had just provoked something they didn't understand. The exterminator cruiser lost control. A cascade of system failures spread through its decks. AI cores collapsed. The ship veered into Earth's gravity well, dragging two smaller ships with it. The impact lit up the southern ocean like a second sun. The ground shook. The tower held. And finally, the skies began to clear. Fires faded. Smoke drifted. The last drones fell from the sky like broken birds. And Earth, for the first time in years, was quiet again. The man from the bunker stepped outside for the first time since the beginning. He looked up at a torn but blue sky. The air still smelled of ash, but beneath it he could feel something else. Warmth. Renewal. From every continent, survivors emerged from the dark. The resistance had held. The fleet had survived. The others, those who had left long ago, had returned. But just as the world dared to breathe again, just as hope began to take root, a new signal appeared. But it wasn't human. And it wasn't Dominion. It came from deep space. Deeper than anything ever charted. Not a ship. Not a message. A presence. And the new human fleet, those who had returned to defend Earth, they stopped. They turned. They didn't answer. They just left. All at once, without warning. They vanished into the void. Gone. Leaving behind silence. And questions. And one final message burned into the sky above the tower. You are not alone. And you are not ready. Then the tower shut down. Its light faded. The metal cooled. And Earth stood alone again. But this time not broken. This time remembered. And somewhere in the stars something else was now listening. The tower never lit up again. 4 days, survivors gathered near its base, looking for any sign of movement or life. But the surface stayed cold. Silent. What had once glowed like the heart of the planet was now nothing more than dark steel and cracked stone, half buried beneath snow that had begun to fall again. It was like the world had taken a deep breath and was finally letting it out. Above, the skies were clearer than anyone could remember. The stars were visible again. No warships. No fire trails. No shadows of fleets waiting to strike. Just space. Endless and still. For the first time in years, Earth wasn't under siege. It was just Earth again. The man from the bunker stood on a ridge overlooking what had once been a city. He didn't even remember which one anymore. Too many names had been lost. The buildings were mostly gone, just outlines and broken skeletons swallowed by dust. But the people, were still here. Around him, tents had been set up. Smoke rose from small fires. Laughter rang out from time to time. Children chased each other through the rubble. Some of the older ones helped build makeshift shelters, their hands rough and steady. It wasn't much. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something. Reconstruction started with the simple things: clean water, food lines, safe zones. Communication relays were being re-established between survivor camps. What was left of the resistance had evolved into a temporary council, not to lead with power, but to coordinate supplies and keep people from falling through the cracks. The scars were everywhere, but so was the strength. He'd seen humanity at its worst. Now he was watching it rediscover its best. There were still questions. Still fear. What had the tower truly been? What were those ships that had come to defend Earth? Were they really human? And what was that final message they left behind? You are not alone. And you are not ready. That one line kept echoing in his head. He wasn't alone in that. In every outpost, in every rebuilt broadcast hub, people talked about the same thing. What came next? The Dominion was broken, scattered. Their fleets had retreated. No new assaults had come. But they weren't gone. And whatever deeper presence had sent that final signal from the stars, that wasn't Dominion either. That was something else entirely. Something even the fleet feared. But even with those shadows hanging above them, the mood on Earth had changed. People were building again. A small child handed the man a piece of charred metal. It was bent into the shape of a bird. She smiled, proud of her work. He took it with a nod, his throat too tight to speak. It wasn't just a toy. It was a symbol. A sign of what humanity still had left. Creativity. Hope. the stubborn refusal to stay buried. Across the ocean in the dam camp, the woman who had once broadcast the first survivor signal stood at the edge of the lake, staring at the horizon. She'd lost her sister in the final assault. She hadn't cried, not yet. There wasn't time. But now, with the quiet settling in, she let herself feel the weight of it. And even through the grief, she knew it had mattered. They had held. In the highlands of what had once been South America, a scavenger-turned-mechanic powered up a salvage drone and sent it into the sky, not to scout for enemies, but to map out safe routes for travelers looking to reconnect with loved ones. His brother had vanished 2 years before. No signal. No sign. But now, with the world starting to breathe again, there was a chance. He wouldn't stop searching. In the far north, under snow and sky, the last remnants of Earth's old military stood at ease for the first time. No battle plans. No incoming strikes. Just watchful silence. Some of the soldiers still slept with weapons at arm's reach, instincts too deep to break. But now, some of them were smiling again. Cooking. Reading. Being human. And in orbit, where broken Dominion ships still drifted like frozen ghosts, the Retribution fleet stayed behind for a little while longer. No one knew how the ships remained operational or who exactly they answered to. They never opened their hangars again. Never re-established contact. But they didn't leave in silence. Just before the last one jumped to deep space, it transmitted a simple code burst. The message read, "You defended your world. We defend the legacy. Until next time." And just like that, they were gone. The galaxy was quiet. But not empty. Because across the stars, those who had once forgotten Earth were now watching it again. Some with awe. Some with fear. And a few, those who knew what humans were capable of, with something else entirely. Respect. Because humans had not just survived. They had endured. They had burned in silence. Bled without backup. Fought without fleets. And when they had nothing left, they still stood. That story would spread. And with it, a warning. That Earth may fall again. But it would never fall quietly. Back on the surface, the man from the bunker looked at the horizon. It was strange, how different the world looked with peace pressing at its edges. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It was calm. Full of promise. The stars above still held secrets. But they no longer felt unreachable. He knew Earth wasn't ready for everything out there. Not yet. The message had been clear. There were bigger things waiting. Bigger threats. But that didn't frighten him. Because now they knew. They weren't alone. And they wouldn't face the future unprepared. The network of survivor colonies was slowly forming into something more permanent. A united front. Not a government, not yet. But a shared voice. Rebuilding wasn't easy. Some cities couldn't be saved, and there were still too many who would never come home, but it had begun. Brick by brick. Seed by seed. Hand by hand. People asked him what to call this new beginning. He told them to call it whatever they wanted. He didn't care about names anymore. He cared about actions. And everywhere he looked, he saw people acting with heart. Not just rebuilding structures. Rebuilding trust. It would take time. But that was okay. Time was something they finally had again. One night, as he sat near a fire watching the sky, an old radio beside him buzzed to life. No voice. Just static at first. Then, soft music. Faint. Crack. But unmistakable. A human melody. Old, familiar, beautiful. It wasn't coming from Earth. It wasn't coming from any known satellite. It was coming from somewhere far beyond. Maybe from the fleet. Maybe from someone else. But it didn't matter. He leaned back, eyes to the stars, and let it play. And he smiled. Because the war was over. But the story of Earth was just beginning again. And this time, the galaxy would remember who humans were. Not because of their weapons. Not because of their ships. But because of their will. Their refusal to be forgotten. Their ability to rise. And to rise again. Even when the universe believed they had already fallen. HFY.